So, dear respected Thai, dear sisters and brothers, can everyone hear okay? Louder, okay. I'll do my best. um, so, welcome to the Brooklyn Museum for a day of mindfulness. We are a group of 5 monks and some volunteers who are on a kind of pilgrimage. We're walking from our monastery in upstate New York, Blue Cliff Monastery, to the intention is to go to the reflection pool in Washington, D.C., and to enjoy each step in mindfulness. And so we just spent a week in the forest, walking straight out our back door in Blue Cliff Monastery on Monday morning, and we had about 20 people in total. So we walked in 2 groups, and I think we passed about 3 seasons. So the first night it snowed. We woke up and there was a blanket of snow everywhere. The second night it was below freezing. So in the middle of the night I got out of my camping hammock and I did 50 jumping jacks in mindfulness to warm up. I couldn't see very well. There was no moon, so I knew if I ran on the path, I would probably trip and fall. So I just said, I'll stand in one place and do jumping jack. And then the last day on Friday, when we came into Culver's Gap, it was over 70 degrees. So one of the friends hiking with us was in shorts and a t-shirt. And yesterday, the monks that were in both groups, we had a chance to sit together and share a little bit about the first week. We call this retreat the Path of Happiness. If you know a little bit, how many of you have been to Plum Village or been on a Plum Village retreat before? Just so I know, okay. So our teacher, Thich Nhat Hanh, he often would teach the traditional teaching of the Four Noble Truths in Buddhism, that there is suffering or ill-being, that there's a cause of ill-being, the cessation of ill-being, which he called the conditions for happiness, and the path that leads to the end of ill-being as the path of happiness. Because when we are able to take care of our difficult emotions, our suffering, then that automatically becomes happiness when we can transform it. And I'm from the U.S., from Connecticut, and growing up in school, we learned about the Declaration of Independence, the famous line that all men have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And so the full title of this retreat is Life, Liberty, and the Path of Happiness. Because the way we practice in Plum Village and with mindfulness is to touch happiness in every moment. It's not something that is out there for us to go and get, but is actually in how we are this very moment, how we are with our breathing, how we are with our body. And so we're going to start this morning with 3 sounds of the bell. So Brother Dhamma Reason, Brother Phap Luu, is one of the monks who's traveling with us. So he will invite the 3 sounds of the bell, and it's an offering. Whenever we hear the sound of the bell, it's an offering for us to come back to our breath and come back to our body and just enjoy our breathing. We don't have to think about anything. What's happening in the next 10 minutes or the next hour. We don't have to worry about what happened this morning or how we slept last night. We just fully come back to our breathing. So all of our attention is on our breath. So breathing in, I know I'm breathing in. And breathing out, I know I'm breathing out. So as we listen to the bell, we can let the sound of the bell penetrate us and remind us to come back to our body and come back to our breathing. Yeah. So, dear friends, I'd like to start by introducing some of my brothers who are walking on this path together with me. So first, our eldest brother, Brother Phap Sa, or Brother Equanimity, from Holland. He's living at the European Institute of Applied Buddhism, which is a center our teacher created. I like to think of it as creating a practice center in Germany, right at the acupressure point of a deep ancestral suffering in Europe. And Thay was very adamant in his last years of teaching to create that institute. Sometimes we didn't necessarily agree, all the brothers and sisters, but Thay was very clear. We need to create it. It's in a building that was used by the Nazis during World War II as a kind of a resort area. But originally it was a hospital. And it was used as a maternity hospital. And so Brother Phap Sa is one of the elder Dharma teachers in that center of creating a space for transformation and healing. And there's Brother Phap Khai, who's helping with the camera, or a rising of the Dharma, his name. And he's originally from Vietnam, but he grew up. He came to the U.S. as a teenager and studied engineering. So he worked for Intel, designing microchips before, and then he took a year off to practice meditation, and he never came back. And so we're very happy to have him on the trip. He also likes to call himself lazy monk. Actually, he does a lot of things, but he's like our teacher. He does a lot of things, but he says, I'm a very lazy monk. It's really doing it with peace and joy. That is the practice of laziness. And then Brother Phap Luu, Brother Dharma Reason, is from France, uh, from from Normandy, in the north of France. And he's living in Blue Cliff Monastery in New York, and is a very active brother. Quite often if you go there in the winter, you'll see him skiing off into the forest, or maybe getting on his bike and riding somewhere. He's very active, and also likes to walk around barefoot. He's the barefoot monk to get in touch with Mother Earth. And he's helped with the children's program and many things in Plum Village. And Brother Dao Han is a novice monk from Holland who's come from Plum Village to join the hike. And he's we're very joyful. We're very happy to be able to bring a younger brother on the trip. It's kind of, we're creating a mobile monastery by walking along the Appalachian Trail. And so we have all the aspects of at least the monk side. We didn't yet have a chance to have the sisters, the nuns, to come with us this time. Hopefully next time they will be able to come. So we have Dharma teachers, fully ordained monks, as well as novices walking together. And my name is Brother Phap Luu, or Brother Dharma Stream. And like I said, I grew up in Connecticut, not too far away. I was trying to remember the last time I came into Brooklyn, though, as we drove here this morning. I was really happy to come off of, we were staying in Manhattan, and to come in and see the buildings are lower and a bit more human. It made me feel warmer, like the New York that I remember when I was a young boy in the early 80s. And I would come in with my school group or something, and everything was a bit more lower and somehow a bit more human. Not everything, but... So I'm going to share a little bit today about the path of happiness, which in our tradition, in the Buddhist teaching, we often call the Noble Eightfold Path. So as we're hiking for 7 weeks, and we're giving talks like this in days of mindfulness in the cities along the way, and then we go back out into the forest. And so we're literally walking on a path of happiness, but also in our spiritual practice, we are on the path of happiness. And so the Buddha often talked about that path as having eight parts, and those 8 parts are interconnected. So you cannot just take one of them and go off with that. But you can think of it as a room, and there are 8 doors. And all those doors, they all go into the same room. And so last week, Brother Phap Sa shared about what we call right mindfulness, which is one of the very important parts of this path. So the Buddha often taught about suffering or ill-being and the causes of ill-being. He went out from his home and he lived in the forest, a little bit like we're doing. And he spent a lot of time experimenting with alternative lifestyles. It's not that it was normal in the Buddhist time for people to go out into the forest and live. It was also strange then, just like it's strange now. And so he went out and he tried eating roots and different kinds of fruits. He tried living simply. He tried begging for his food, going from door to door. And he still found that he wasn't truly happy. Even living in the forest, a very simple life, there was still suffering, still kind of ill-being, kind of disease. He saw it as a kind of disease of the mind. And he couldn't understand how to bring an end to that ill-being. He saw that the things that he'd done in the past, the things that he'd thought in the past, the things that he'd said in the past, they still reverberated in his consciousness. Maybe how he related to his wife, or his parents, um, maybe how something in his society, maybe the violence and aggression he saw in his society and in the community he grew up in. All these things are things that he inherited. And when he sat in quietly, he saw that they came up in his mind still. They disturbed his mind, and he wasn't able to be really at peace, really happy. And so he went into that. So he used his own insight, his own looking deeply into himself, in order to understand what are the causes of this ill being. And he saw that it's actually in our actions. And this is very important, in our own actions. Many times we think of our suffering as something that comes from outside, from society, the injustice in society, or we think it comes from our parents. And that is partially true, because we are not separate from our parents, and we are not separate from society. We inherit the collective consciousness of our ancestors, both blood ancestors, our cultural ancestors. So through schooling, through just going into town, maybe going to church, we are inheriting a whole body of actions in every moment. Actions of thinking, actions of speech, actions of our body. And we, as a young person coming into this world, we start to act following the impulses of that consciousness. And sometimes that brings us happiness, but sometimes it also brings us suffering, because we continue the anger, the hatred, the jealousy, the sadness, also that is there in the collective consciousness. So by looking deeply in himself, he saw that happening. He started to see how he had inherited these actions and continued them. One of my sisters, she likes to say that if you don't transform something, you transmit it. And I like that phrase very much. It's a way of seeing that we are kind of transmitter. We are receiving through the society, and even in ways that are not visible, the desires and the ambitions of our ancestors and those who are around us. And so if we are not careful, the hatred, the anger, the division, the violence, we also receive that, and if we're not careful, we also transmit it. So we continue that cycle of violence. You may have heard of the term samsara, and that is just a term to talk about this cycle of violence, hatred, and anger, which is just continuing. Sometimes we call it the cycle of birth and death, but you can think of it as a cycle of violence and aggression as well. And so the Buddha wanted to look for a way to disrupt samsara, you could say, disrupt this endless cycle of birth and death. And so he found that by transforming his suffering, by understanding it, and seeing that by understanding it, he can remove the causes that bring about this ill being, that he can actually generate joy and happiness. He can generate calm. He can generate freedom. And for me personally, when I started practicing mindfulness about more than 15 years ago, about 17 years ago, when I first experienced this being aware of my breath and generating joy within myself, not because I went and bought something or because I did something that I really wanted to do, or even because somebody said something nice to me, but just by following my breathing and being aware of my body, this joy manifested inside. And that is a moment that was a moment of freedom. Suddenly I realized that I don't have to be so dependent on outside conditions for my happiness. I don't need to try to get something or do something or be someone in order to be happy. But just by generating this awareness of what's going on in the present moment, in my body, in my thinking, I can generate joy. Our teacher liked to say that a true practitioner knows how to generate a feeling of joy wherever they are, whenever they are. And he was very emphatic. In his last talk that he gave before his stroke, he was in a wheelchair, and I remember it was almost like he was trying to come out of the wheelchair. He said it twice very strongly in French. The talk was in French. And that teaching continues to reverberate in my consciousness. When I feel doubts about my path, or a little bit uncertainty, I just come back to that. And I remember that it's about joy and happiness in the present moment, wherever you are, whenever you are. If I'm struggling with my suffering, that means I'm not practicing correctly. We like to talk about looking at our suffering as a baby that is crying. So just in the same way that we listen to the bell and we stop what we're doing and we come back to our breathing, when we're overwhelmed with sadness, when we feel full of hatred or anger towards someone or something, rather than looking at it as something just disagreeable that we want, of course it is disagreeable, and we just want it to go away, but rather than trying to avoid that emotion, instead we see it as a kind of baby that is crying, and we are the mother. Our mindfulness, the energy of mindfulness, is a mother that then directs her attention right away, without even hesitating, to the baby that is crying. And she takes that baby and she holds it and embraces it. And just by holding it close to her chest, the baby already calms down. So she understands better how to remove the cause of the ill-being of the baby. Or if the baby continues crying, she thinks maybe it's hungry. Maybe it needs something to eat. Maybe it's thirsty. Maybe I need to breastfeed my child. Right? So she looks into the causes of the suffering of her baby. And that is that image is a very fundamental one for how we approach our difficult emotions, like sadness and anger and jealousy. We look at it as a crying baby that needs care, rather than something we just want to cut off. Many times when we suffer, we get up and we go to the refrigerator and we open the door and we see what's in there, because we don't want to look inside. So we rather look inside the refrigerator. So the invitation is to look inside and see what is going on there. What is it that is making me want to run away from this unpleasant feeling, this unpleasant emotion? And so that the part of the Noble Eightfold Path that we're looking into today is right thinking or right intention. Our thinking sets our intention, so they are intertwined. And sometimes in Plum Village we talk about aspiration. What is our deep aspiration? What is something within us that motivates us in our life's path? In every moment, what is the fuel that is driving us to work, to live, to take care of our friends, and it's very important to be aware of that aspiration. So we use mindfulness to see in every moment, what is my intention? What is the thinking that is motivating me to say that thing, to do that thing? And so it turns out it's not so much more difficult than just being aware of our breath. So maybe we can just take a moment again and we'll listen to a sound of the bell. So I invite you just to look. We're going to set an intention to put all of our attention on our breathing. It may happen that you, within a second or two, you become distracted by your thinking, but just come back to that original intention. Just be gentle with yourself and say, okay, and smile and come back to the breath over and over. And see if we can do it for the whole sound of the bell, just being aware of your in and out breath. Okay, you can open your eyes. How many of you were able to follow your breath for the whole period? Can you raise your hand? Wow. All right. How many of you got distracted one time? Okay. How many of you got distracted 2 times? I'm one. More than 2 times? Okay. Thank you for your honesty. So actually, it's quite normal. Our mind has a tendency to always be searching around, looking for what's coming in through the ears, through the eye, through the nose, the tongue. So there's all kinds of input, and our mind is always jumping around to try to find out what is there. Maybe there's a danger, maybe there's something interesting we want to go towards, or something we should fear. And so we're always checking on our senses. So my first time I got distracted, I was thinking about what I'm going to say next. And then I realized, what is the point of sharing about mindfulness if I'm just thinking about what I'm going to say next? I'm not living in the present moment. And so I smiled and I came back to my breathing. And then the second time I thought, wow, that air conditioning is really loud. Anyway, and then I came back to my breathing. So I find it very helpful to have a sense of humor about my practice, not to be too serious. Sometimes we think, oh, I need to transcend the cycle of birth and death, and like a bodhisattva riding on the waves of the ocean, and then we lose our practice because we're too serious, too strict. And actually, we enjoy happiness and humor and joyfulness as human beings. If we are very serious and strict with ourselves, sometimes we no longer want to be with ourselves. And so mindfulness becomes a kind of like a stern father who's always pointing a finger at us. In Thay, our teacher, we call him Thay. It means teacher in Vietnamese. He always reminds us to touch our joy in the practice, not to be caught in the form. So if we get distracted while we're aware of our breath, we just smile. We don't judge ourselves, say, oh, I'm such a terrible practitioner, anything like that. Because I guarantee, even if you practice for 15 years or 20 years, you'll still get distracted. The difference is that you have cultivated, if you are a practitioner and you every day, if you continue to cultivate this path by practicing in a community with people who like to practice mindfulness, then it becomes a habit. And so more and more you find yourself coming back to your breath. When you notice irritations, some frustration because something hasn't gone your way, then you, rather than just continuing and doing things more rapidly and getting more irritated and then making things break and so they work even less, you see that that's not really helpful. You learn from experience and you see, okay, why don't I just smile and come back to my breathing? I'm a little bit stressed out now. This past week when we were hiking, there were many, many opportunities to get frustrated. So myself, I had a number of moments where I really saw that whether we were cooking or, um, you know, maybe a couple of times we missed the marker on the trail and we ended up actually on a totally different trail. And we came to a road and we said, we're not supposed to be at a road. And so that was a moment of, okay, how do I respond? I like to see it in every moment. There are many, there are millions of possibilities of how the next moment can unfold. And all of those possibilities are dependent on your state of mind, your intention. If you have the intention to generate mindfulness, to generate joy, then that is the future you'll experience. If you have the intention, though, to get more frustrated, to get more irritated, to yell at the people around you, then that is the future you will experience. So it's very simple. Our intention becomes reality. When we were walking, we would stop from time to time, and in the group of 8 or 9 of us, and we'd have a sharing, what we call a Dhamma sharing. So we share about what's going on in our feelings, what's going on in our body. And I shared that I was quite happy because I remember years ago when I would hike, before I became a monk, more than 15 years ago. And when I would get distracted, I would always know because I would trip on a rock. Usually, if I was really thinking about something, I was not present with my body or my breathing, then the trail would let me know. I would suddenly trip and then maybe not fall down all the way, but hurt my toe. And I was so happy I shared because these 3 days that had happened so far, that hadn't really happened. I was really with my step, with my breathing. And another brother who was hiking with us, a lay brother, and he said, well, I wish I could do as well, but I've almost fallen a couple times getting lost in my thinking. And then about 10 minutes later, when we were back walking on the trail, I thought about that, and I thought, wow, that's interesting. This getting distracted while you're walking, and just in that moment that I thought about it, I tripped on a rock, and I got, well, my second toe got all swollen, and I thought, wow, even thinking about thinking is dangerous. So the practice is not a theory; it is something we can experience in reality. When we are lost in our thinking, then we experience it. We say things that are hurtful, or maybe we're not really aware of what the other person's needs are, what they're trying to communicate to us. When we practice sharing together, we try to cultivate what we call loving speech and deep listening. And I always share that when we're speaking in a group like that, and all of us are practicing to be aware of our listening, what we call deep listening, that it is very, very precious to have people around us who listen deeply to what we have to say. Like, I'm very, very grateful that you're here today with the intention to practice mindfulness, and that you're doing what you can to listen deeply and allow what is being shared to go deep in your consciousness. That is not the normal kind of listening we experience every day. Usually we just listen to receive information about what we're going to do next. And we ourselves are just planning to tell the other person what they need to do next, even while they're telling us what we need to do next. And so there's kind of like talking heads, you know? Um, and we're not actually deeply listening to what the other person has to share. So I'd like for us today, as we have a day of mindfulness, even while we're together and while afterward when you go back home, to see if you can set an intention now to listen deeply to everyone who speaks to you today, just for today, rather than planning what you're going to say next or sharing about the future or the past. Just be present for that person. When we set that intention, then it becomes reality. That is the nature of the practice. So I wanted to share a little bit today about some mantras we have in Plum Village, which help us to set our intention in our relationships with each other. It's a way of cultivating right thinking. And these mantras are in English, or whatever language you're used to speaking, but I think we all speak English here. They're not in Sanskrit, they're not in some strange language we can't understand. But they're very helpful ways for us to reestablish contact in our relationships, both with ourselves and with others. So the first mantra is I am here for you. I am here for you. So when someone comes to us and they seem a little bit stressed out, a little bit anxious, a little bit worried, you can practice this mantra. I am here for you. It's amazing. It's very magical, the effect it has. When you hear somebody say to you, I am here for you, you just stop what you're doing and you're like, wow. At least for me, when somebody really says, I am here for you, I suddenly feel present. I feel heard. I feel like I'm recognized as a person. I'm not just part of their plan for the future, but they're actually there to listen to what's going on for me. And it's like two people recognizing each other in the present moment. I am here for you. There's no plan, nothing about what happened in the past, complaining about nothing. We're not even talking about the weather. Just, I'm here for you. And that's the kind of mantra we can also use for our loved one, our partner, or maybe our parents or our child. I am here for you. When our child comes home from school, we can say, I am here for you. Or even the child can say for the parents. In Plum Village, I often do the children's program. And we train the children as well in these mantras to be fresh as a flower when their parents come home from work. Because kids, they often think they have nothing to offer their parents. The parents are like gods. They are the ones who dispense all things. The video game machines and cellular phones, and they have these magical abilities. And as a child, they feel they have nothing to offer. So I always like to tell the children, the best thing you can offer your parents is your freshness, is to be like a flower. When they come home from a hard day of work and you are smiling in the door and joyful to see them, and you can say, I am here for you, Mom, you will bring so much happiness and joy to your mom or your dad. That is one of the greatest gifts you can offer them. And they're quite surprised. They can offer something to their parents. So just like the children, I think we can learn as well how to offer our presence to another person with this mantra, I am here for you. And the second mantra is, I know you are there and I am so happy. I know you are there and I'm happy. I like to often end emails with that phrase or start them when somebody writes to me and maybe they're a little bit worried about something or they want me to do something, I like to come back to that point and say, I know you are doing this. I know you are there, and I'm so happy. Now, usually I wouldn't say you're doing something because I don't want them to think it's because they're doing that I'm happy. Only because they're there, that makes me happy. And especially on email, because I find it's so removed from a physical reality. So sometimes it's hard to, I notice that I have to be very careful before I send an email sometimes. If I have an emotion, it's better to leave it aside and come back to it tomorrow, not to send that email. But especially, establishing your happiness to know that somebody's there and that even if they're worried or they're upset with you about something you did or didn't do, that you recognize that they're there and that you're happy. Even more so when you're physically there with the person. To just to recognize their presence. I know you are there and I'm so happy. It brings joy right away to both people. And that is actually the purpose of a mantra, is to bring joy and freedom. So the first is I'm here for you, so offering our presence. The second is I know you are there and I'm so happy, so recognizing the presence of the other person. And the third mantra is when we see that our loved one is suffering, or maybe it's our boss or our colleague, or maybe it's our child, and we recognize that, we want to acknowledge their suffering. We are actually we are like a friend helping them to look deeply into their suffering. So the third mantra is, I know you suffer, and I want you to know that I'm here for you. I know you suffer, and I want you to know that I'm here for you. So of course we already know I'm here for you, but to recognize also the presence of ill-being in the other person, it means that they are no longer alone with their suffering. It means that they have a friend, a practitioner, who's helping them to look into the suffering. So just as we looked into what's happening in our mind while we're being aware of our breath, we can help each other as a collective to look deeply into a situation of suffering. When we do like that, when we cultivate compassion in that way, the other person suffers less right away. They don't feel isolated or in solitude. They feel like they're not alone holding their suffering. They have somebody else who's there, who's actually helping them, reminding them to bring awareness to that suffering. Just by mentioning it, it's kind of like the elephant in the room that nobody's talking about, right? When somebody comes to you with a lot of anger, with a lot of hatred, well, it might not be the right moment yet to right away say, I know you suffer, right? You have to be careful, because sometimes people say, suffer? I don't suffer. What? Who needs to suffer? I'm not suffering. And then we turn this way. Yeah. And so we have to be skillful. That's why we start maybe with, I'm here for you. We don't need to, it may not be skillful right away to bring the awareness of the suffering there. And when the person knows we are there, we accept them as they are, even in their anger, their irritation. And we say, I know you are there and I'm happy. Already that irritation goes down. And then if the suffering is still there and we see they are open, they recognize our willingness to help, that we're not an enemy, we're not there to contribute to the problem, but we're there to help. That's when we can say the third mantra. I know you suffer and I want you to know I'm here for you. So it is the capacity to generate compassion, that is setting an intention to reduce the suffering of the other person. Compassion is not only empathy, it's not only feeling what the other person is feeling, but is also helping to transform the suffering of the other person. It is active. It is understanding the root causes that bring about that ill being and helping that person to remove those causes. On the trail, we often were talking about the fire. On the last night, we had a campfire, and we know that if there's not enough dry wood or enough oxygen, or if the wood if we don't have the flame, that there are not sufficient conditions for the fire to manifest. And when the fire is blazing, very hot, we know that if we take the wood and we separate it, that the fire will become less and eventually maybe go out. So we know how to create conditions for a fire, and we also know how to remove the fuel that is making the fire, allowing the fire to manifest. We've heard the term nirvana. Perhaps you're aware of that term. And that is actually a term that describes the ash after a fire has burnt itself out. So when you wake in the morning and you see that, as we did on Friday morning, and we saw that the campfire was completely out, and I said, look, it's nirvana. It's been nirvanized. It is not some faraway mystical state. The Buddha was just using words to try to describe what happens when the fire of our afflictions no longer burns, when we remove the conditions that bring about ill-being, so that the fire can die down and become cool like the ash. He often described nirvana as being a cool, blissful state. So in the same way, when we look deeply into our suffering, we see that there are causes and conditions for that suffering, the second noble truth. And when we become skillful, we are able to start to remove that nutriment, those causes and conditions. And so these mantras are a way of doing that, of recognizing the suffering in the other person and then seeing how to help them to remove the fuel. As by being an ally, by being somebody who is there to support, to help, rather than being somebody who's there to be an obstacle, then already that person suffers less. Already they feel understood and heard. Maybe we listen to a sound of the bell, come back to our breathing. Breathing in, I'm aware of my body. Breathing out, I relax my whole body. I'm aware of any tension in my back, in my neck, in my shoulders. And I allow that tension to relax, to take a bath of mindfulness. So mindfulness has this interesting quality. It always wants to help us reduce our suffering. In fact, naturally we want to be happy. That is our nature. As living beings, all living beings want to be happy. They want to be free from suffering, free from anger. Now we can recognize the emotions in animals. We can see when an animal is in rage, and when they've studied everything from chimpanzees to mice, um, they see that all mammals want to get out of a situation of rage or anger as quickly as possible. There's no animal that wants to continue, except perhaps human beings, that wants to continue to be in a condition of rage or anger. Every animal tries as quickly as possible to remove themselves from a situation where that feeling or that emotion is manifesting. And so I feel we can learn something from other mammals because in myself at least, and I think many of us, we tend to kind of like um, masticate, or how do you say, like the cows do, right? You eat your grass and then you cough it back up and you start chewing it again. Yeah, I mean, I can't remember the word, but huh? Ruminate. Thank you. Ruminate. We ruminate on our our negative emotions like anger. Yeah. Negative is not a great word, but it is a disagreeable emotion that brings up a lot of painful feelings in our mind and in our body. But for some reason, we have this tendency to just ruminate on the things that others have done to hurt us, and so we've Homo sapiens, we've developed this capacity to kind of continue to maintain ourselves in a low level of rage over long periods of time as a kind of background noise. It's like when you're walking in the supermarket and you hear the love song playing and you don't know why you feel so good. Why you go over and, oh, wow, why don't I buy that shampoo? Yeah, I think I'll put that in my cart. And you don't know that in the background, your consciousness is being transformed. So in the Buddhist tradition, we talk about a kind of unconsciousness, or we call store consciousness. We have our mind consciousness that is it's like our computer screen. It is what is there. If we're working on a Microsoft Word document, it is right there in front of us on the screen. But when we save it and we close, where does it go? So somewhere in the hard drive, right? Or in the memory of the computer. So we know that if we are skillful, we know how to access that document again. We can pull it up on the screen. So our mind consciousness operates in this similar way. There's differences, but it's a good metaphor. We have a kind of hard drive, and we cannot, if you take that hard drive out of the computer and you take it apart and you try to look for the document, you cannot find it. But we know that with skillfulness and the right programming, that out of that hard drive, we can make a document manifest on the screen of our mind consciousness. So we also have a kind of consciousness like that we call store consciousness. We cannot access it directly, but if we know how to touch the seeds that are there in our store consciousness, we can stimulate them so they manifest in our mind consciousness. So that's how we generating a feeling of joy. We know that the emotion, the seeds of joy are there in our store consciousness, but we have to cultivate the way to skillfully make it manifest in our mind consciousness. In the same way, there are the seeds of anger, of fear, of jealousy, and if we think in certain ways, if we respond to situations in certain ways, we know that those seeds will get watered and they will come up in our mind consciousness. So most of our practice is just understanding how to water the positive seeds like joy and happiness and freedom or mindfulness, so that they can come up in our mind consciousness and stay a long time. And how to also recognize emotions like anger or jealousy when they are present, and learn skillful ways to invite them to go back down and to store consciousness. It's not that we eliminate them entirely, because everyone has the seeds of joy and happiness, and everyone also has the seeds of jealousy and anger and sadness. There are no just sad people or jealous people. There are people who have those emotions. They've cultivated them like a gardener by the thinking, the fuel that gives rise to the fire of our afflictions. So they've cultivated those emotions, so we see them a lot, so we think that's a sad person, or that's a jealous person, or that's a very angry person. But actually, we all have all the seeds in our store consciousness. So you can relax a little bit and not worry because you get angry or you get jealous. I like to talk about jealousy because I thought, as a monk, I don't have any jealousy. What should I be jealous about? We are celibate, so I don't have a partner as a monk. And I thought, well, this emotion is not relevant for me anymore. Somehow I didn't consciously think that, but I operated in that way. I was living my life until about 10 years into my monastic life, when I realized that there was a curtain in my consciousness that I had drawn, and I opened it, and there, jealousy. And jealousy was there, like, oh! He suddenly was caught, I called him by his true name. And they tried to point me in other directions. No, 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 no. This is anger. Or this is joy. Or this is your deep aspiration. I'm not jealousy. He was trying to dissimulate, be somebody else. And so I got distracted again. But then I kept coming back, and I said, oh my gosh, you are operating in the background, like the music in the supermarket, in my consciousness, because I haven't called you by your true name. I haven't recognized you. I haven't actually said, I am here for you, to my jealousy. We need to be able to learn to say, I am here for you, my jealousy, rather than treating it like a second-rate citizen. All of our emotions are first-rate, are first citizens in our consciousness. So we have to treat them with respect, even anger and jealousy and sadness. Because if we don't, they will just operate in the background. They're not going to disappear. They're just going to keep operating. And we will say things, we will think things, we will do things that will be based in those emotions. So our intention, we might think consciously our intention is good, but actually these other forces are operating on it. So we on the outside, it looks like we're doing really good things. Even we as monks, we say, oh, we're on a pilgrimage to Washington, D.C. to bring calm and peace to every step as we go. That can look very good. But we also get irritated and frustrated at each other, and we can easily get jealous, maybe. So we have to be careful about this, just looking at the surface of things. A truly good and beneficial intention is not just on the surface, but it goes very deeply. And so that is why, as practitioners, if we want to be truly happy, we have to be honest with ourselves and recognize when these difficult emotions are also there, to give them a first ranking in our consciousness, as much as happiness and joy and the ones that we want to make stronger. There was one writer, she gave a talk, and Elizabeth Gilbert, she wrote the book Eat, Pray, Love, and I was there when she was giving a talk, and she said that it's not that we want to, it's like we're driving in a car, and there's joy and there's also fear. And it's not that we want to stop the car and force fear to get out of the car and stand on the side of the road. But rather, but at the same time, we're going to tell fear, you can sit in the back. You're not going to touch the steering wheel. You just stay there, and we'll enjoy your presence, but you're not going to drive this car. Joy is going to drive this car. And I like very much that way of looking at it. That is helpful. If we're not careful, fear may not be touching the steering wheel, but could be a backseat driver and actually guiding a lot of what we're doing in our life. For me, I got a lot of freedom in my practice when I was able one time to get the insight when I had a lot of anger coming up in my relationship with one of my brothers. And I was practicing walking meditation because our teacher often suggests that when we have a strong emotion like anger coming up, we should stop what we're doing right away and come back to our breathing and then enjoy walking meditation. Just as we will do in a few minutes, just being aware of my step and the contact my step makes with the earth, and being aware of my breathing, but not allowing my attention to go to my thinking. Because every time it got into my thinking, I thought about all those terrible things that he'd done and said, and how could he do that, and how, and that thinking was a fuel to the fire of my anger. Thinking requires attention. If you don't give attention, thinking cannot manifest. It is one of the conditions for thinking. We think that there's these unbroken stream of thoughts always coming and going, but actually they are receiving nutriment through our attention. And when we cease to give attention to our thinking, for example, when we bring all of our attention to our breathing, the thinking no longer manifests. It doesn't have a requisite condition for it to manifest anymore. So I noticed in the midst of this anger while I was walking that there were these gaps where I was only aware of my breathing and my body, and the anger was no longer being fed. And so my practice was to widen those spaces, to make them longer. And I noticed that the less that I gave my attention to my thinking, the wider those spaces became, until they became so wide that the thinking had died down and the emotion of anger had died down. And I had the insight that perhaps for most of my life, I have only been living to avoid situations where my anger manifests. That I was, instead of dealing and embracing my emotion of anger, like a baby crying inside, I was just kind of charting out my life to find situations where that seed of anger would not manifest from external sources. And when I had that insight, that was another huge liberation, just like being able to generate joy, because I realized that I can go anywhere, I can do anything as long as I know how to take care of my anger. I don't need to avoid situations that I think are difficult. I don't need to live my life like this, going around just trying to avoid difficult situations. I can go right into it because I know that those outside conditions are not ultimately the source of my anger. The source of my anger is in my own consciousness and how I take care of my mind, whether I allow that fuel to continue to feed the fire of my anger or not. And so practicing mindfulness is understanding how to set this deep intention to transform our actions of body, speech, and mind. We talk about 3 kinds of karma. Karma means action. And the field of our body, speech, and mind are the 3 areas where we can actually change our future. We think that and of course, when we see an injustice in the world, we want to express it. We want people to know about it. But that injustice may continue to happen. We cannot easily change outside conditions. It's not easy to change another person. But we do have a lot of power to change our own mind, to change what our thinking is, to change what our speech is, to change our bodily actions. And so the more and more I find on my path of practice, the less I give attention to what other people are doing, even what governments are doing, the more I give attention to what my own actions of body, speech, and mind are. Because I know that is the field in which I can operate with a lot of power, actually. It's very empowering to realize that you change your future with your actions of body, speech, and mind. That it's not just the course of some fatalistic people, God sitting there sewing the fates, right? Sewing the fabric of our future, or of some government, or of some institution, or even our parents, even our teachers. But actually, though we receive the seeds in our consciousness from them of their actions of body, speech, and mind, it is right here at this point, in the present moment, where we can make a change. So we transmit what we don't transform, but we also transmit what we do transform. So our kind actions, our generous actions of body, speech, and mind also are transmitted. And the more kind people, and the world needs kind people, the world needs generous people. It really does. But only you can become a kind person or a generous person. Nobody can make you. This is a core part of the Buddha's teaching. Years ago, being back in New York City makes you remember we did a wake-up tour in 2011. And so have any of you seen the film Walk With Me? Some of you? Yeah. So that we did a flash mob sitting meditation. I think Jenny was there. And many, who else was there in 2011? I don't know if anyone else was there. Anyway, we went and we sat in Union Square. We didn't have a permit. We didn't have anything. We just went and we walked down to Union Square and we sat in meditation, a bunch of the monks and nuns. And there was a preacher there, a street preacher, which you see in the film. And during the whole time of our half an hour of sitting meditation, he was preaching to us, well, to anyone who was around. And I always remember he said, the Buddha cannot save you. And I said, yes, that's right. You're right. The Buddha cannot save you. Only you can save yourself. The Buddha didn't go around saying, I can save you. I am the savior. He discovered the Dhamma. He found a path that was already there. He just helped to clear away the sticks and the brush that was blocking us from seeing it. He didn't even say he created the Dhamma, which is the teaching of the Buddha. All he said was we could call him a pathfinder, the one who discovered the path that is already there, the path of happiness, how to become really truly free. So that is the intention that we set in our lives, to take care of our actions of body, speech, and mind, so that we can also walk on that path of happiness. That is what we do as monks. That's why we decide on this career. It's not because we wouldn't like to get married and have kids and be in a loving relationship in that way. But somehow we see that the love we have for everyone is very large. And we don't want to, we want that our love to extend out in every direction. We see that the world is a place that needs more love. It needs more care. It needs more kindness, more generosity. And when we see that there is a path where we can cultivate that, we just want to dedicate all of our life to doing that. We don't want to get caught in any of the other distractions. It's not that we don't get caught. We do get caught. But we make that intention. And that is what guides us. That's why we wear the brown robe. That's why we decide to live together in the monastery, to create these communities of resistance. Thay often called our monasteries and practice centers as communities of resistance. We, by coming together here today at the Brooklyn Museum, we're creating a community of resistance. We're not resisting looking at our suffering. We're resisting the tendency to run away from our suffering. We have the courage to be able to look at our own suffering and understand it as a friend rather than as something we just need to cut off and throw away. So as we deal with the aggression and the violence we see around us, whether it's in our schools, whether it's in Syria, we know that by setting our intention now, by planting seeds of kindness, of generosity, of freedom in our own actions of body, speech, and mind, that we are generating a beautiful future. It doesn't mean that suffering won't continue to happen in the world, but we are doing our best. And I really deeply see now that that is the best we can offer. Our own actions of body, speech, and mind, being kind, being generous, to transform this situation of violence that we see around us. It is because our ancestors maybe couldn't do enough to plant those seeds in the past, that these seeds of violence and aggression are manifesting in the future. So we know now that we enjoy happiness in the present moment because being kind, saying kind things, thinking kind things brings us happiness now. It also brings us happiness in the future. And that is not only an individual matter. Our happiness is not only an individual matter. So don't get caught in thinking that you're being selfish because you are happy. Your happiness is automatically collective. It is linked to the collective, to those around you. Everyone needs a happy friend. And some people don't even have one happy friend. And you could be that happy friend who says, I am here for you. Who says, I know you are there and I am happy. Who can say, I know you're suffering and I'm here for you. And the fourth mantra, which is the most difficult one to say, is when we can look at our loved one and say, I'm suffering, please help. When we're able to get beyond our own pride. The Buddha often talked about pride being the last thing before you transform all your afflictions. It's the one that sticks around the longest. Even the pride of being a good practitioner, that is the dangerous one that still sticks around at to the very end. And so our pride keeps us from letting others know about our suffering. We think we are a good practitioner. We are the happy one. We cannot tell the other person that we're suffering. But then how can they understand how to help us? How can they understand? Maybe they are the one who can help us to see the cause of suffering that's hiding behind the curtain, operating in the background. When we live together and we practice together in a sangha, a community of practice, that's the benefit we receive. My brothers are always reminding me, they're like bells of mindfulness, reminding me of my weak points, the areas where I'm still creating suffering in my life. And so if I'm not able to share that I'm suffering with them, how are they able to tell me about it? They feel that they can't say that. They can't help me in that area. So this fourth mantra is difficult to say. And even for me, I still have trouble sometimes to say it. But I know that when I do say it, that I get relief right away. Because I know that my brother, my sister, is there for me and is willing to help me to relieve that suffering, to remove the causing condition. So I hope with these four mantras, you can set a deep intention for the rest of today at least, and maybe for the rest of this week. So the first one, again, I am here for you. The second is, I know you are there and I'm so happy. The third is, I'm suffering. The third is, I know you are there, I know you suffer, and I want you to know I'm there for you. And then the fourth one, I suffer, please help me. Please help me to understand my suffering. You give the other person a chance to cultivate compassion, to practice compassion towards you. So that is the practice of right thinking. These mantras are a way of cultivating the kind of thinking that is not harming, that is not based in greed or ambition or desire, but is based in compassion, in kindness, in joy, and letting go as well. Because we know to truly love, we also have to practice letting go, yeah, of our love. So thank you for listening. So now I'd like to invite my brother to come up, and um, it's 10:30, so soon the museum will be opening, and we'll practice walking meditation together. So I hope you enjoy deeply this kind of almost a day of mindfulness. We'll be together, and we plan to be together till 2 o'clock. So we'll have after this walking meditation. So we'll go outside in the park, and if you have a bag or something to sit on, we'll then enjoy our lunch together. So I hope everyone brought a lunch. If not, we'll try to share. And so we'll have a chance to practice eating meditation together. Very important, especially if you have that tendency when you suffer to go to the refrigerator instead of recognizing your suffering. It's very helpful to have a practice community, eating in silence together, and just being aware of the food and where it comes from, all the conditions that have come together for this food to be there. And then we'll probably we'll see how with the weather and so forth, whether we have a sharing or maybe a question and answers to finish out the day. So thank you so much for coming, and we'll finish with 3 sounds of the bell. So we can just establish ourselves solidly, sitting on the rock of Mother Earth. Come back to our breathing and just fully be present for our breath. You may like to undo your legs and give them a massage. I'd just like to ask, how many of you are here to hike with us this coming week? Could you raise your hand? Okay, great. So we will. For those of you, like I shared, we are on a kind of pilgrimage hike. Those of you who are here just for the day, and if you'd like to see more information, you can go to pathofhappiness.org. So it shares a little bit about the intention behind this walk. And there's still possibility in coming weeks to join us. So if you feel inspired and you like to be in nature, and you have some experience with hiking and maybe a little bit with camping, you're welcome to join us. It's a donation-based only retreat, just like today is just donation-based. Yeah, we have a box if you feel inspired or moved to offer a donation. It's all going to support more events like this in the weeks to come as we go farther south to Philadelphia, Baltimore, Allentown, near Harrisburg, Harper's Ferry, and finally to Washington, D.C. We'll be doing days of mindfulness every Sunday, and during the weekdays we'll be out on the trail in our camping hammocks, walking in mindfulness. And so for those of us who are here today to join us, so every Sunday people start in on the trail, and then we'll go out this afternoon to to a campsite near the Appalachian Trail, and then tomorrow morning we'll begin hiking together. So for those of us you are here for this following week, after lunch we will gather together in a smaller group, so we can share a little bit about the coming afternoon and tomorrow. And yeah, please, if you feel inspired to support as well in the coming weeks, I think next week we'll be in Allentown, Pennsylvania, at Lehigh University, or near Allentown, Lehigh University. There'll be a day of mindfulness next Sunday, also at 9 a.m. And so we'll share more at the end. So we can finish. We can all stand up, and our practice at the end of an activity is we bow to greet one another, just to offer our presence, kind of like a flower to each other.